It's coming to you with all of your people. Asking to approach your great throne of mercy under the headship and the authority of our great teacher in these last days, our pastor and overseer, Yisrayl Hawkins, and through by the authority of our righteous high priest, Yeshua, our Messiah. Father Yahweh, we do come before you this day, thanking you for this opportunity to rehearse the words, Father Yahweh, of a great witness, and that we will be reminded of the great writings, Father Yahweh, that we will be inspired to continue, Father, to seek after your righteous character and allow these things to be within our lives daily as we learn to make right choices, Father Yahweh, which will bring honor and glory to your great name. We do pray and ask that you will be with us and that you will guide us and strengthen us and protect us both now and forever. And we do pray and ask all of these things in Yeshua, our Messiah's name. Hallelujah, Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. Men, you may be seated. We're going to be starting on page 21. And there is someone out there. There is someone out there. Actually, I want to start off somewhere else just to rehearse just a little bit. Turn back to page 6. Page 6. And we're not going to read all of this, but I do want to put some things, in your mind here. I just want to rehearse a couple of things concerning these horns or these religious powers. On page 6, in his reading from the World Book Encyclopedia, 1981, volume 16, pages 375 and 378, it says, we find some very interesting or important facts about this Roman religious power. And just reading the highlighted parts here, it says, the Roman Catholic Church is the largest body of Christians in the world, and it has more followers than all other Christian groups combined, and more than any non-Christian religion. Then it says about 49 million Roman Catholics live in the United States. And then it talks about the Pope, how he governs from Vatican City, which is an independent state within the city of Rome. Then it says the church operates schools, universities, hospitals, orphanages, and homes for the aged in these and other countries with large Catholic populations. In a few nations, Catholics have formed strong political parties. And remember that they're formed strong political parties. The Roman Catholic Church has been an important force in world history. It says during much of the Middle Ages, for example, the church had great political power in Western Europe. Then it talks about the church in the New World, and it says here that the Catholics became a powerful political factor, and it speaks about large cities such as Boston, Chicago, and New York. And then, of course, Pastor continues on talking about the horns and how Daniel prophesied about these religious powers that actually changed the laws of Yahweh, changed the feast days, the Sabbath days, and so on, and so the Sabbath day, and so on and so forth. I just wanted to remind you of these horns because it's going to be very interesting what we talk about tonight concerning this religious power or these religious powers who think to cause you to forget Yahweh. So starting on page 21, the great Khan left off last week speaking about the name of Yahweh. And so, of course, I want to read this in Jeremiah 23, verses 26 and 27. How long will this be in the heart of the prophets who prophesy lies? Yes, they are prophets of the deceit of their own minds, who devise, which is plan and scheme, to cause my people to forget my name through their dreams, which they tell every man to his neighbor, just as their fathers have forgotten my name for Baal, which is the Lord. And so, as we continue on here, we'll see how, what Pastor's doing is he's proving without a shadow of a doubt that there is a creator. Okay, and his name is Yahweh, and Yahweh has a specific way in which he says that we need to worship him or we need to serve him, because in servitude to Yahweh, it brings life. And when we forget Yahweh and serve the gods, it leads to death. And so there's only one way to achieve life, and that is by knowing who our Father is. And so Pastor is going through great detail to show us, who our Father is and what we need to do in order to have life and to be accepted by him. So let's continue on here on page 21. How true Jeremiah's inspired words are. Even today, Yahweh, the true name of the Creator, is unspoken and unheard among 90% of the people of the world today. And the majority of those who do hear it with such slander that they believe it carries bad connotations. Yahweh's name has been forgotten and replaced with the filthy pagan titles God, Lord, Baal, Adonai, El, and Elohim. And for most people who don't understand what the word or the titles God and Lord mean, this may be pretty offensive to them. But, sometimes the truth often hurts. And I remember when I first found out about the name of Yahweh, I was pretty shocked that, my whole life I had never heard the name of the Creator, which should be the most important thing to us. And so when I realized that the name of the Creator was Yahweh, and understood the definitions and the meanings of God and Lord, I wasn't offended because I realized that I was deceived. And remember what Revelations 12:9 says, that the whole world is deceived. Okay, remember, let's look at 2 Corinthians while we're on that subject of this deception, because the world does not know Yahweh because of this great deception that is perpetrated by these horns, these religious powers. So in 2 Corinthians 4, verse 4, let's read that really quick here. 2 Corinthians 4, verse 4. For the gods of this world, led by Satan, have blinded the minds of those who do not believe, so that the light of the message of the glory of the Messiah, who is in the image of Yahweh, should not shine unto them. For we do not preach ourselves, but Yeshua Messiah the ruler, and ourselves your servants for Yeshua's sake. Okay. And in verse 3 it says, but if our message is hidden, it is hidden to those who are lost. Okay. And this deception is really strong. It's very, very strong. And it's so strong, in fact, that even when people are called out and they come to Yahweh's great house, they end up leaving for some reason, for some form of unbelief. Okay, for some form of unbelief. And so it's very important that we pay close attention to what Pastor's writing here so that we can build up on this foundation a strong belief within ourselves. Okay, remember what Yeshua said, upon this rock, this house, I will build the family of Yahweh. But if you're not building a strong foundation with the laws and the prophecies, then what are you building? You're building something that's going to be easily destroyed. And so that's what the teachings are for, to help us to build within ourselves this strength in the knowledge of Yahweh. Because remember, the laws are the strength of Yahweh. The laws and the prophecies are the strength of Yahweh. And if you have that as a foundation, then you can build a solid structure or a solid dwelling place for Spirit Holy to dwell. But remember, the beginning is knowing Yahweh's name and going to the place where he chose to establish his name and keeping the Sabbath and meeting with him for your eternal appointments. So remember, it's this deception from these religious powers that have separated the people from Yahweh. So continuing on here, it says, and this abomination was inspired by the great whore that Yahweh's prophet Yachanah was inspired to write about. This great whore is not leading the kings and inhabitants of the world to worship Yahweh. She is leading the whole world into God worship, or leading the world into God or El worship, which is nothing more than demon worship. And the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible, Volume 1 on page 817, shows this plainly. In the Old Testament, Damionism, Damien, the Hebrew equivalent of demon in the original sense, is simply commonly rendered God. Okay, and if you look in Unger's Bible Dictionary, it'll show you, gods, old gods, new gods, the gods of Egypt. It's all the same. It means demon. The Roman Catholic Church has done well in fulfilling what was written about her by Yahweh's prophet Daniel. 1. She commits fornication herself and influences the world to do the same by worshiping God, El, or Lord, which is Baal, and demons instead of Yahweh. 2. She admits to changing Yahweh's feast days and Sabbaths to worship on Sunday, the Lord's Day, and on other pagan festivals throughout the year. And 3. She makes war with anyone who would worship Yahweh, use Yahweh's true name, or keep Yahweh's laws, or who is identified as belonging to Yahweh. So I wonder what they're going to do now in the the ones who worship on Sunday, since they found out that the Lord is asleep on the Sabbath. Since Sunday is their Sabbath and the Lord is asleep, I wonder if they're going to wait till he wake up. I mean, what are they going to do? Because he's not helping them. And it's amazing how, we were talking about this yesterday, how the prophet Elias said the same thing when they had the altar set up. And y'all remember, Pastor? And he dumped all of the water on it. And then he brought down the fire from heaven. But when they were trying to light the thing on fire, nothing occurred. And he said, well, maybe he's asleep. Cry louder. So this is also spoken of in the scriptures. Cry louder. Maybe he's asleep. Wake him up. Nope, still asleep. Over 2,000, how long ago was that? 4,000 years, still asleep. While Yahweh is judging and watching over his house, protecting us, inspiring us to do righteous works, Yahweh is not asleep on the job. Praise Yahweh. Continuing on here, it says, in 3, she makes war with, okay, I read that. The proof supplied by the fulfillment of these prophecies alone should be enough to convince anyone of the authenticity of the Holy Scriptures and the existence of the Creator. But Yachanan's inspired word supply even more proof for those who are not yet convinced. How could it be that a man, without the inspiration of a supreme being, could be so accurate in his prophecy showing the identity of this great whore? The fact is that a mere man on his own could not. That is why the following prophecy with the Catholic Church has fulfilled as well an additional proof. And notice in Revelation 17, verse 9. And here is the mind which has wisdom. The 7 heads are the 7 mountains on which the woman sits. And we're very familiar with the scriptures in Revelation chapter 17 concerning the prophecy of the Catholic Church, where it sits, how she reigns over the kings of the earth, and so on and so forth. And that's amazing detail within itself. Speaking about the 10 kings and the 10 crowns and 10 kings and so on and so forth. It's a prophecy is a very amazing thing. And then in this time period, how we're like living in current prophecy, watching things unfold, just watching and waiting and paying attention as these things come to pass. There's no other time period like now, man. And we should be very thankful that we are alive to witness these things. And we should be very thankful that we are seeds of Yisrayl Hawkins. We should be very thankful for that. Praise Yahweh. And speaking about the Catholic Church here and their influence, remember how they're deceiving everyone. And remember when Constantine in the Council of Nicaea, was there just 1 or 2 gods that they were voting on and making them their Lord or their God? There were, I think it was like 50-something gods, 52 gods or something like that, or they narrowed it down to like 5. And then at the very end, they said, well, let's just make 2 of them one, Jesus and Krishna, which eventually became Jesus Christ. Okay. And through this teachings, they went throughout the world, conquering and forcing people to believe the lie. Okay, forgetting Yahweh's name and serving and worshiping gods and lords. And this is evident in the history books, in the encyclopedias. I mean, it's proof there, but the scriptures also foretold of these things. And I think it's in 1 Corinthians where it's written that there are many gods and many lords, but to us there's only one authority, and that's Yahweh. Okay, but so we cannot forget Yahweh, and we must trust in what's written for us in order for us to be a part of his eternal administration and be a part of his kingdom. So we cannot forget Yahweh. How could it be? No, let's skip down here to, not skip down, but I already read that. Towards the bottom of page 22 here, the second to last paragraph. There is no other religious organization that sits upon 7 mountains. There is no other religious power that completely reigns over the political leaders of the world's governments except the Catholic Church. The most powerful nations in today's world give their support to the Pope, simply because the majority of the people are Catholic. The Protestant religions follow the same man-made traditions of God worship that were instituted hundreds of years ago by the Catholic Church. Now, y'all remember the Protestant religion, right? All the teachings concerning the Protestants and the Catholics, the 2 horns. Now, remember that? Keep that in mind, because we're going to learn something very interesting tonight, if you didn't already know it. These traditions, such as Christmas, Easter, and Halloween, all originate in pagan God worship, yet the world readily accepts them. It is the Catholic Church, which sits on 7 mountains, that has taught all the leaders of the earth idolatry, as Revelation 17, verses 1 and 2 reveals. I now pose this question. Without inspiration from a superior being, how could a man who lived 1900 years ago have known that in this last generation, the Catholic Church would have so much power that it could lead all the nations of the world into God worship? Okay, now let's consider this for a second. This man over 1900 years ago wrote about this. Okay, Yachanan, Daniel, they all wrote about the Catholic Church rising to power. But just in 1996, I think it was 96 or 97, Carl Bernstein wrote a book called His Holiness, And he said, if you would have told me 10 years ago that the Pope would have had so much power, I would have said, you're smoking something. You know, they didn't see it. They had no understanding. Okay, they didn't understand that the Pope was going to be such a powerful influence in the world. But Yahweh inspired his prophets to know these things. Okay, so that's more proof that Yahweh is out there. There is someone out there inspiring his people to perform righteous works and inspiring them to know what's going to take place in the future. Okay, just like he wrote about Pastor and said, it's your job to foretell these things. Tell them what's going to take place. Okay, Pastor's not just dreaming this stuff up and saying, hey, this is going to, no, he's telling us what's written. It's his job to expose the unfruitful works of darkness and to tell us the consequences for breaking Yahweh's laws, and also to tell us the rewards and the benefits from keeping them. Okay, great reward is there in the keeping of Yahweh's laws. You know, life alone is a blessing. Life alone is a blessing, but Yahweh says there's more if you're completely obedient. If you learn to love these laws and if you teach these things, there's going to be such a blessing poured out upon you that your storehouses couldn't even hold it. Okay, your land's going to be blessed, your cattle, your animals, everything's going to be blessed. The fruit of your body's going to be blessed. Everything's going to be blessed. Pastor goes on and says, wait, there's more undeniable proof of prophecies already fulfilled. In Revelations chapter 13, we see another one of Yachanan's prophecies concerning the United States of America. A prophecy, by the way, that can already be proven true. No mere man without inspiration from the Creator could have accurately foretold these things, especially one who lived and wrote almost 1900 years ago. Notice Revelations 13, verses 11 through 18. And I saw another beast coming up out of the earth, and he had 2 horns like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon. Okay, he had 2 horns like a lamb. Now remember these horns. Again, let's go back to page 7 here. Hold your place. It says the words translated horns and horn are both word number 7162 from 7161, and it means power. And then Pastor says in the Decenius Hebrew Chaldee Lexicon of the Old Testament, it means the symbol of strength and power. And these words figuratively mean religious power. So these 2 horns are these 2 religious powers, okay? Like a lamb, but they spoke like a dragon. And he exercised all the authority of the first beast before him and caused the earth and those who dwell in it to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. And he does great wonders so that he makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceives those who dwell on the earth by those acts of power, which he had authority to do in the sight of the beast, saying to those who dwell on the earth that they should make a likeness of the beast, which had the wound by the sword, or by a sword, and did live. Verse 15, and he had power to give life to the likeness of the beast, that the likeness of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the likeness of the beast should be killed. And remember, we just saw yesterday that map that Pastor held up showing in the green that those who will not submit or worship Mary, that they're going to make war with them. Okay? Those who are not going to follow Mary, they're going to make war with those nations. So, because they didn't want to worship the likeness of the beast. And he causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, that they should give to themselves a mark upon their right hand or on their foreheads. And this is misunderstood by the religions of the world, because they're still looking for someone to have like a 666 tattoo on their forehead and on their hand. And that's not what it means. You know, it means, keeping the beast, Sabbath days and feast days, doing the work of the beast, which is celebrating Christmas, celebrating Halloween, and so on and so forth, and not keeping Yahweh's Sabbath and receiving the instructions from Yahweh and not keeping Yahweh's feast days. And that no one might buy or sell unless he had the mark or the number of his name. And here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. And we already know that the words on that fish hat, what is it called? A mitre? And I can't remember what it says. One more time? Vicarious fale day. And I think it's the Latin numerical value of that is 666. Okay? And this was written by Yachanan, so he even knew that. thus proving again that Yahweh has inspired his men of old, his prophets. Because, matter of fact, while I'm thinking about this, let me read to you Luke 1 verse 70. I hope I'm right on that. Let's see. Luke 1:70. Okay, praise Yahweh. Luke 1:70 is on page 781 in your books of Yahweh. As he spoke through the mouths of his holy ones, his prophets of the ages. Okay, so Yahweh is speaking through his prophets. That's how he has always done it. He's always spoken or inspired his holy men of old. And in this time period, you know, he's inspired the ones sent to bring forth this great knowledge. Okay, this great knowledge that no one else has. This great knowledge that he has only given to his house. So continuing on here, bottom of page 23. Notice the fact that this beast rises up from the earth, meaning where there are no peoples, multitudes, nations, and languages. This beast rises up in the great land of the United States of America. It comes up strong, seeking to emulate the first beast shown in Revelation chapter 13, which is the fourth beast shown in Daniel chapter 7. This beast invents the nuclear bomb. Revelation 13, verses 13 through 14. And he does great wonders, so that he makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceives those who dwell on the earth by the acts of power which he had authority to do in the sight of the beast, saying to those who dwell on the earth that they should make a likeness of the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. Now notice, it had authority to do in the sight of the beast. So the beast is what gave it the authority to bring down this fire from heaven. Okay, now that's a very important fact. That's a very important detail concerning this religious power, these religious powers, the two horns. Continuing on here. Now let me again pose this question. How could a man who lived nearly 2,000 years ago in the land of Israel possibly know these things without the inspiration of an all-knowing superior being? How could he know that a nation would be raised up somewhere else in the world, in a new land, somewhere where there were no peoples, multitudes, nations, and tongues? The great land, known as the United States of America, had not yet been discovered in his lifetime. Despite this fact, this man recorded the message that was given to him, that this nation would arise. And remember, let's read Revelation chapter 1 there, so we can see how this information was given to Yachanan. Revelation chapter 1, verse 1. The revelation of Yeshua Messiah, which Yahweh gave to him to show his servants things which must surely come to pass, and he sent it and signified it through his Malach to his servant Yachanan. All right, so it was just passed down and given to Yachanan, and Yachanan wrote it down. He wrote it down for us. And so what he wrote down, all of those many years ago, where we've seen it come to pass, and we're still watching things unfold that these men wrote about before our lifetime through the inspiration of Yahweh. You know, it's amazing, simply amazing. He was inspired to write two other very important facts about this nation. One, it would be led in religious and political matters, not by one, but by two religions, Protestant and Catholic. And two, it would invent the great nuclear bomb, which would be used to destroy 1/3 of the world's population in the last 70 years of the 6,000-year period allotted to mankind. Okay, so you see those two horns right there, right? Those two religious powers, Protestant and Catholic. Protestant and Catholic. Now what's even more amazing than this is the fact that this nuclear bomb was first prophesied of by Moshe. He was inspired to describe the nuclear bomb, the fallout that follows the blast, and the burning that results from the explosion of the nuclear bomb. And just within my lifetime, modern science has finally learned enough to verify the facts Moshe wrote about so long ago. Starting here in Deuteronomy 28 verses 15 and 22 through 24. However, if you do not obey Yahweh your Father, and do not carefully follow all his laws and his statutes, which I command you this day, then all these curses will come upon you and accompany you. So you see right off the back, he said, if you do not obey Yahweh your Father, then all of these curses will accompany you. Why? Because if you do not keep the laws of Yahweh, then guess what? The character of Yahweh cannot be developed within you. Okay? If you don't keep the laws of Yahweh, then the character of Yahweh cannot be developed within you. And so what occurs if you do not have the character of Yahweh? Then you have the character of the gods, the character of Satan. Matter of fact, let's read something else while I'm thinking about it now. Let's look over to Galatians. It should be right around page 915 or so. And so you should be very familiar with this because we're going to talk about the fruits of the flesh, or the works of the flesh here. Verse 19. Now this is not having the character of Yahweh. And so if you don't obey Father Yahweh and keep his laws, then this is what's going to occur to you. It says the works of the flesh are these. It's obvious, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, licentiousness, God worship, sorcery, hatred, contentions, evil jealousies, rage, selfish ambitions, dissensions, which are disagreements with quarreling, heresies, which are sects or factions of divisions, envy, murders, drunkenness, revelries, and the like, of which I warned you beforehand, just as I did in times past, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of Yahweh. And so these are the curses that accompany us if we do not keep the laws of Yahweh. These are the character traits that we develop when we do not keep Yahweh's laws. But when you keep Yahweh's laws, it says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, patience, kindness, righteousness, the faith. And again, I like to remind you that the faith simply means living according to the every word of Yahweh, or living by the every word of Yahweh. Meekness, gentleness, humility, temperance, which is self-control, and such things are not against any law. Okay, praise Yahweh. These things are not against the law of Yahweh when you develop these positive character traits. You become just like Yahweh when you do these things. But let's go back to what takes place when you don't keep the laws of Yahweh, when you have all of these negative character traits in you, when you're like the gods with this rage, this hatred, these selfish ambitions, and so on and so forth. It says that Yahweh will allow you to be struck with consumption, with fever, with an inflammation, with scorching heat, with the sword, with blasting, and with mildew. They will stay with you until you perish. Why is this something Yahweh's doing? No, it's the evil in our own hearts. Desiring to retaliate and to get revenge. This hatred for our brother and our neighbor. These are the things that's in the hearts of people who do not keep Yahweh's laws and do not learn how to love his brother, learn how to love his neighbor. Okay, can you see why the laws of Yahweh are so important? It teaches us not to be worried about ourselves, but to actually care for someone else. And you're not getting that out in the world. The only place that truly teaches how to love someone else is at the house of Yahweh. And I don't care who or what preacher who's well known tries to tell you. Okay, they're not teaching love. The only thing they're really concerned about is how much tithe they're bringing in. And that's the truth. That's the truth. They're not teaching you Yahweh's laws. They're completely teaching you against Yahweh's laws, separating you from your Father. Continuing on here, verse 23, and the heaven that is over your head shall be brass, and the earth under you shall be iron. Yahweh shall make the rain of your land powder and dust. From heaven it shall come down upon you until you are destroyed. So Moshe was talking about this nuclear holocaust that's going to take place because of the lack of the teaching of Yahweh's laws and because people did not obey. Now, I just made a statement there saying that the preachers, it don't matter who it is, they're not teaching Yahweh's laws and so on and so forth, that they're only concerned about their own selves. But, I don't like making statements like that without backing it up with scripture. And this is what Father Yahweh has to say. He inspired the prophet Jeremiah to write this in verse 23. Woe to the pastors, the shepherds who destroy and scatter the sheep of my pasture, says Yahweh. Therefore, this is what Yahweh, the Father of Israel, says against the pastors who feed my people. You have scattered my flock and driven them away and have not attended to them. Behold, I am going to attend to you for the evil of your doing, says Yahweh. Okay, why? Verse 22. But if they had stood in my counsel, well, let's look at verse 21. And the Kyle mentioned this yesterday. I have not sent these prophets, yet they ran. I have not spoken of them, yet they prophesied. But if they had stood in my counsel and had caused my people to hear my words, the law and the prophets, then they would have turned them from their evil way and from the evil of their doings. Okay? If they would have stood and listened to the priest of Yahweh who was teaching righteousness, if they would have stood up for the word of Yahweh, then the people would have heard the word of Yahweh and turned from sin, not developing the evil and the hatred in their hearts that are now filled in this world today. But praise Yahweh that he has established his house to turn these things around, and you're here and you're in it. So praise Yahweh for this wonderful opportunity. But this is what we still have to pay attention to. We still have to watch as these prophecies are fulfilled, because, we're going to have to endure what's going to take place in this time period. Because when we see this actually takes place, this nuclear burning, there's no way ever that we're going to ever allow it to occur again. Okay? Once Yahweh turns over the kingdoms to the saints of Yahweh, to the priesthood, we're going to do everything in our power to stop these things from ever occurring again. Because we're going to be teaching righteousness, and people are going to love each other. And that's a blessing from Yahweh. The word translated scorching heat in verse 22 is word number 2746, which comes from word 2787 in the Hebrew dictionary of Strong's Exhaustive Concordance, and means melting by extreme burning. Okay, and you can see the underlined words there is extreme burning, or to melt, burn, dry up, to burn, to kindle. The survivors of the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings testify it was like fire came down from heaven, devouring the cities and the people in them. These survivors were quoted as saying, a person would be standing against a building and his flesh and clothes would just consume away. It would be consumed away. Others had their eyes consumed away in their sockets, and their flesh just disappeared off their bones, and their bones dropped to the ground. Okay, and we're going to read what the prophet Zechariah wrote here concerning that, because he prophesied the same thing. But I want you to take a look at this here. Let's see. I don't know. Can you see this? Okay. Maybe not. But what it is these are the strike orders for Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Okay, and I'll go back to that in a second here. But it tells you the date of the mission. This was August 6th, 1945. It tells you the weather, the combat strike, the gas, the miles, the cameras that were used, the pilot, all of these things, right? Okay, and it also shows you religious service. Do you see that right there? Catholic and Protestant, the two horns, are actually on the strike orders. And this is the other one. You see this one here? Catholic and Protestant. Okay? Catholic and Protestant, the two horns. So, and it shows you the time that they had their religious services before the missions and everything. Catholic and Protestant, these two horns who had the authority to make fire come down from heaven. It's amazing, isn't it? Yeah, amazing, simply amazing. So you don't think pastor's the witness? You don't think that Yahweh's out there? Praise Yahweh. Continuing on here, this is what Zechariah wrote in Zechariah chapter 14, verse 12. And this will be the plague with which Yahweh will allow to strike all the peoples who have fought against Jerusalem. Their flesh will consume away while they stand upon their feet, and their eyes will consume away in their sockets, and their tongues will consume away in their mouths. And this is what takes place, when these type of weapons are used. And we've seen the footage. We've seen that, the shadows are actually burned into stone from the extreme heat. Your shadow actually burned into stone, and people that were somewhat away from the bomb, they were still affected, to the point where when someone was giving these people water, they died because their body went into shock. And these bombs were detonated pretty close, almost 2,000 feet in the air. They didn't hit the ground and explode. They exploded in the air. I think one was at about 1,600 feet or something like that, and the other one I think maybe was 13 or maybe 19. I don't know. You can find that information where they were detonated, but almost 2,000 feet in the air, and fire rained down from heaven. The fire rained down from heaven. Zechariah describes perfectly in this verse what occurs to flesh after the detonation of nuclear weapons. When we compare this prophecy with the evidence noted above, it becomes obvious that studying and learning the inspired prophetic writings is the only way man has to save himself from destruction. Let us again look at the following scriptures. Deuteronomy 28, verses 22 through 24. Yahweh will allow you to be struck with consumption, with a fever, with an inflammation, with scorching heat, with the sword, with blasting, and with mildew. They will stay with you until you perish, and the heaven that is over your heads shall be brass, and the earth under you shall be iron. Yahweh will allow the rain above your land, powdered and dust. From heaven it shall come down upon you until you are destroyed. The word translated sword in verse 22 is word number 2719 from 2717, and it means to desolate, to destroy, to kill, make waste, dry up, slay, to perish through war. To perish through war. And this is what Moshe prophesied. He was inspired to write that, in this time period, they're going to use these bombs, and powder and dust will be your rain, and it's going to stay with you until you're destroyed. And there's going to be scorching heat, and it's going to be through war. You're going to perish through war. We're going to continue on here. It says, the word means a cutting instrument from its destructive effect. It says a knife, sword, sharp implement, axe, dagger, knife, mattock, sword, or tool. But it also means, kerub means to desolate, to destroy, to kill, to slay, to make waste, to lie. The word blasting in Deuteronomy 28:22 is word number 7711, and it means to scorch from blasting. To scorch from blasting. And you see here it says blight, blasted, to scorch or blast. The word blast in this context actually means war and the effect of it. This is an explosive blast, an indication of a nuclear explosion by means of war. Moshe's prophecy showed that the rain of the land will be powder and dust. And the word powder is word number 80, and it's from word number 6083 and from 6080. And it means powder, dust, powdered or gray. It says ashes, dust, earth, ground, mortar, powder, rubbish. To be gray or to pulverized, to be dust. To be dust. Okay, that's 6083. Now this powder and dust is also a result of nuclear warfare. When these nuclear weapons are detonated, they will pulverize the soil, turning into volatile particles, gray in color, that will rise above the earth. This powder and dust is known as nuclear fallout, which will rain down upon the earth, just as Yahweh prophesied. 1900 years ago, mankind did not possess explosive weapons. In fact, explosive weapons of any kind were not invented until the 14th century CE. It was only recently that scientific tests were performed, actually proving to mankind that a full-scale nuclear war using less than 1/3 of our nuclear arsenal would actually cause the sun to be blotted out. The sun's light rays would not be able to reach the earth, and all life as we know it would soon vanish on the earth and in the ocean. No one knew this before these tests were performed, yet this was prophesied almost 2,000 years ago by Yeshua. He said, as the following verses show, that in this last generation, mankind would have the capability of destroying all life by weapons of war that would blot out the light rays of the sun. In Matthew 24, verse 7, for nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and pestilences, disease epidemics and earthquakes in place after place. And this is part of the living and current prophecy that I was talking about. I mean, we're seeing these effects all over the world, and even here in Texas. We're seeing the drought. We just watched some of the news yesterday. How about that town that a lot of people are probably going to leave because of the drought, okay, not being able to feed the cattle, the livestock, and not having the jobs to support the people so that they can support themselves. So a lot of people are going to leave, and that's because of the drought. And all of that is because of sin, the breaking of Yahweh's laws. Okay, and we already know the teachings behind those things, bringing forth this global warming because of this uncontrolled lust, forgetting the name of Yahweh and serving the gods. But like Yahweh said, all of these things will continue to come upon us until we perish, if we don't choose to do righteousness. Now, Yahweh prophesied all of these things and allowed the holy men of old to write these things concerning the disobedience. He showed where the Catholic Church was going to be and how they were going to bring forth this false teaching of salvation. But he also showed where to go in order to hear the truth. Okay, so if he's so accurate about the place that's going to bring forth this false message of salvation, then don't you think that he would be just as accurate concerning the place where there's going to be salvation and who's going to be teaching salvation? Do you think he's only going to be, batting 50-50? No, Yahweh's 100% right. 100% right. Just like he told you where the Vatican is going to sit on the 7 hills of Rome, he told you that the house of Yahweh would be established at Abel. Okay, led and guided by the witness Israel, who's going to bring perfection to the house, to those who will listen to him. Okay, Yahweh also prophesied about that. I'm just throwing that in because we're looking at this nuclear war, but Yahweh says that this is also the place of protection. But without the inspired writings, we wouldn't know that, would we? We wouldn't know it. And even though people have Bibles, they still don't know it because they're rejecting the one sent. So again, you don't know these things unless you have a teacher. Okay, I wanted to throw that in there. Okay, you can read all you want, but if you don't have a teacher, if you don't listen to the one sent, then you still have nothing. You have nothing because you can't save yourself. Okay, only through pastor are we going to be saved. Okay, through the teachings that he's bringing forth because he's inspired by Yahweh to lead us into the kingdom. Praise Yahweh. Now I lost my place. Let's see. I read Matthew. All right, here we go. Matthew 24, verses 21 and 22. For then will be great tribulation, such as has not come to pass since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever will be. And unless those days were shortened, there would be no flesh saved. And so he knows that this war is going to be so extreme that if Father Yahweh didn't step in, all life on earth would be totally extinct. There would be no flesh saved. How would they know that if they didn't have nuclear weapons back then? How would he know it? He was inspired by Yahweh to write these things down. Moshe was inspired to write these things. All of the men of old, all of Yahweh's inspired men wrote these things for us. Okay? Yahweh inspired these things to be written. And I'm saying it over and over again because, like the Apostle Shaul said, it's through the foolishness of preaching. And preaching isn't foolishness, but, it has to be said over and over again because we tend to forget. That's why we have reminders. That's why we have the lampstand. That's why we have the ark. That's why we have these things so that we can always remember Yahweh and remember his plan. Because when we forget Yahweh, then we're forgetting about life. We forget about what we need to do in order to have life. Okay, and we can't forget these things. So, and that's why I'm saying it over and over and over again, because Pastor, he doesn't have a problem saying things over and over and over again. It's through repetition. Read the way that he writes. You may read the same scripture in like a 6-page newsletter 15 times. You may read it 15 times, but he wants us to understand the point. So we can't get bored with hearing the same thing over and over again. Okay, this is how we learn things. You think you're going to read the book of Yahweh once and that's it? It's the source of all knowledge. We're going to be using it forever. The books of Israel, we're going to be using them forever. So don't skip these things. Go word for word. Pastor says, listen to us. Every word. Pay attention to every word. Read every word and acquire this great knowledge. Notice the phrase in verse 22, there would be no flesh saved. He was speaking of war among the nations, wars which can cause the sun to be blotted out, the powers of the heavens to be shaken, and all flesh destroyed. Now notice the effects he showed would come from this nuclear explosion. In Matthew 24, verse 29, immediately, but after the tribulation of those days, will the sun be darkened, and the moon will not give her light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Here we have absolute proof of the accuracy to these prophecies inspired by Yahweh. No man could possibly know almost 2,000 years ago that there would be bombs, that could destroy all life, bombs that would blot out the sun and shake the heavens. Since the Japanese cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were devastated by the atomic bomb, scientists have learned much about the effects of nuclear power. The searing heat, the blast, and the radiation effects have been known and studied since these disasters occurred. But two recent studies suggest yet another catastrophic consequence of an all-out nuclear exchange, one that had largely been overlooked, and this is nuclear winter, and that's what Moshe was talking about, part of the fallout and the sun being blocked and things like that. Incredibly, several of Yahweh's prophets foretold of this despicable weapon and its deadly effects upon both mankind and the planet Earth thousands of years ago. This evil invention of death and destruction and the carnage that will result from man's use of it is graphically detailed in the prophetic writings Yahweh inspired. The prophet Yahweh is another one of the several prophets Yahweh inspired to forewarn of this time of nuclear warfare. Notice in Yahweh 2, verses 30 and 31. And I will show wonders in the heavens and the earth, blood, fire, and pillars of smoke. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of Yahweh before it comes. Now, a lot of people who do not know the plan of Yahweh, who read these things, tremble in fear. Tremble in fear like there's no hope. Okay? And it seems like we're the only ones that's just waiting for it to take place so we can move on with our lives. But we're a doomsday call, right? That's what they call us, a doomsday call. But it's like, this is going to take place, and we know it. There's nothing that can be done to stop it because the world is not keeping Yahweh's law. So this evil character that's possessed by man, they're going to bring this to pass. Okay, but we believe the warnings. And so we're preparing our hearts and our minds to be ready to teach righteousness when the time comes. Okay, do we want to see the bombs go off? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I don't want to see people dying. I don't want to see that. But are we going to see it? Yes, we are. Yes, we are. Because mankind is not going to repent. And the scriptures are, matter of fact, Yachanan even prophesied of that also. He says, even after all of these things take place, mankind still will not repent of the evil works of their hands. They still won't turn to Yahweh at that time. How wicked this generation is. But this has been taking place over these thousands of years of separating yourself from the love of Yahweh. And this is what we have now. Yael states here that the sun will be darkened at a meeting in Washington, D.C. Yachanan didn't talk about Washington, D.C. there. I kind of read those scriptures together. I didn't stop at the period. So let me start over here. Yael states here that the sun will be darkened. At a meeting in Washington, D.C., late in October 1983, scientists warned that soot, smoke, and dust from the explosions of less than half of the superpowers' nuclear arsenals could blanket the earth, block out the sun, and cause a prolonged, bitterly cold nuclear winter. This climatic upheaval, these scientists warned, could threaten the survival of the total human race. And that's what Yeshua said. That's exactly what Yeshua said. Unless Yahweh steps in, there will be no flesh saved. And they know that not even with all of the weapons that we have on earth, just a portion of them could fulfill this prophecy. Just a small portion of the weapons that we have could fulfill this prophecy. Planetary scientist Carl Sagan reported that he and several colleagues had run mathematical simulations showing that the pall from burning cities, forests, and fuel stocks would create a dense cloud that could screen much of the northern hemisphere from more than 90% of the sun's light for as long as a month. Within 2 weeks of detonation, the surface of the earth could cool to 13 degrees Fahrenheit and remain that cold for months. After several weeks, the cloud could reach the southern hemisphere as well. Full daylight and normal temperatures would not return for as long as a year. So how long do you think it would take before all life starts to dying out? I mean, because the sun is very necessary for life. Okay, the sun is very necessary for life. I mean, Without the sun, certain microorganisms in the water, wouldn't even have life. And it will just trickle right up the food chain until eventually all of mankind will be affected by it. So the sun is very important, and Yahweh created it for a reason. But it's going to be mankind that's going to block it out, thus creating death and misery and destruction. Using the physicist's predictions, a team of biologists headed by Stanford University's Paul Ehrlich gauged the ecological consequences of several levels of nuclear war. After a major conflict involving more than 3/4 of the available arsenal, the cold would devastate crops and other plant life, particularly if war occurred during the spring or summer. Fresh water would freeze, hungry and thirsty animals would die, and at the same time, the dark would limit photosynthesis, the process by which plants produce the chemical compounds necessary for life. Now see, if the trees and the plants die off, they produce oxygen. Okay, they produce oxygen. And we need oxygen. We produce carbon dioxide. They breathe the carbon dioxide. And without this what's the word that I'm looking for? Coexistence, or this mutual arrangement that we need in order to coexist, you can see how the process of dying starts. A dying you will die. Why? Because of sin. Because of sin. It all goes back to not serving Yahweh, not being obedient to the laws of Yahweh, like Moshe said. All of these curses will come upon you simply because you did not obey Yahweh, your Father. Simply because you did not obey Yahweh, your Father. In the oceans, outside of the Arctic regions, the lack of sunlight would be felt immediately. There, the food chain depends on microscopic plants that are extremely sensitive to changes in the amount of light they receive. On the land masses in the tropics, where most plants lack a reserve of storage, energy, a substantial decrease in the amount of sunshine would quickly extinguish many species. Ehrlich said, over the decades that follow, we cannot exclude the possibility of the extinction of the human species. Okay? So they even predicted that the human species could be extinct with the decades to follow because of this lust, this hatred, this retaliation, this mark of Cain. The evidence is astounding. We can trust the inspired prophecies. There is a superior being in control. And you see, all of that is in boldface and with an exclamation point behind it. And we should be really excited to be able to read and understand the things that are written for us. We should have great joy that when we read and when we hear Pastor teaching these things, that we understand what he's saying, because the world is clueless. I hope I can find this real quick, because let's see. Matter of fact, it's in 2 Corinthians, I think. It's in 2 Corinthians. In chapter 4, I think it's verse 3. No, let's see. Okay, nope, it's verse 6 here. 2 Corinthians 4, verse 6. Yeah, let's read 6. It says, "For Yahweh, who commanded the light to shine out of darkness, has shown in our hearts to give us the light of the knowledge of the glory of Yahweh in the face of the Messiah." Now look at verse 3 again. It says, "But if our message is hidden, it is hidden because those who are lost." Okay, it's another scripture I'm thinking of, and I'm going to kick myself, because as soon as I'm done here, I'm going to remember it when I'm walking off the stage. But the scripture says that we're blessed because we have this knowledge, and no one else possessed this knowledge. And I'm paraphrasing it, and but just remember that it's in the scriptures, and I think I read it earlier today, and it just crossed my mind when I was thinking about this. But we're blessed because we have this great knowledge. Okay, this great knowledge that's only in Yahweh's house. But I want to continue here on page 29, the bottom here. Think of this. The technology of mankind progressed very little in 5,900 years. Just 100 years ago, there were no televisions. Electricity, electric lights, and radio were just making their way into homes. Just making their way into homes. Television and radio were not made part of the American way of life until this last generation. Until the last 100 years, man's technology did not allow advancement beyond horses and buggies. In fact, the United States Civil War of 1860 through 1865 was fought with almost primitive weapons. Yet, prophecy showed that in the last generation, man would develop the means to destroy all life, and gives detail about this most destructive power. And that's something else that's very amazing. I mean, when you really take a look at the last 100 years, just about the last 100 years, you will see how this knowledge has increased. I remember Pastor mentioned here Carl Sagan. He had a series years ago, maybe in the 70s or something like that. It was called Cosmos. And in this show, he was talking about one of the shows was talking about traveling at the speed of light and things like that, and all of these different things. But what was interesting is he was talking about Leonardo da Vinci and how he was trying to make flying, basically airplanes, and he had all of these designs and models for making airplanes, but none of them worked. But the designs were flawless. They should have worked, but they didn't work. And what made this interesting is what Carl Sagan said. He said that it was though he was being held back. Okay? He was being held back. He was ahead of his time, so it didn't work. And it was just like exactly what Pastor had said, it's being held back. It was that time period wasn't the time period when this technology or this knowledge was to be increased. But here in the early 1900s, we see the airplanes going. And then what occurred after that? We saw the film how now they're used for weapons of war. Instead of being used for traveling, they use them to go and destroy their neighbor. Why? Because of this hatred, this lack of keeping Yahweh's laws. Again, everything goes back to forsaking Yahweh and serving Baal, serving the Lord. These prophecies are found in volume 1 and 2 of your holy scriptures. Not only have they been fulfilled as they have been foretold, they have come to pass in the time period of which they were prophesied. They have come to pass in such accurate detail that there is no doubt that they were inspired to be written by a superior being. Only a fool would try to deny the truthfulness of any of these prophecies. Why do I say this? I say it because 99% of them have already come to pass, and with the undeniable evidence stacked in front of us in the most destructive weapons ever devised by man, surely we can see that the other 1% of the prophecies yet to be fulfilled will become a reality within the next few years. With all these facts of the fulfillment of these prophecies set before us in such shocking display, the prophecies inspired by Yahweh become absolutely believable for the honest mind. Okay, for the honest mind. And again, I want to point out all of these prophecies that we've read about so far have come to pass, and we're waiting on the prophesied global burning, which Yahweh says will come to pass. But I also want to remind you of the prophecies concerning Yahweh's witness and Yahweh's house, and the undeniable proof that this is none other than the house of Yahweh, the protected place where Yahweh says this is where you need to come in order to have salvation. Okay, those prophecies are 100% true too, as well as how it was established, when it will be established, and so on and so forth. To everything there is a purpose. Seeing this kind of undeniable proof, there is no way we can keep from understanding the existence of the Creator. What we must understand now is the purpose for creation. Why the chaos on earth why the chaos on earth and in heaven? What events are yet to befall mankind? Why was mankind created? What are the plans for mankind? And I think that's a great place to stop right there. Okay, so think about those questions. I'm going to read them again here. Why the chaos on earth and in heaven? What events are yet to befall mankind? Why was mankind created? What are the plans for mankind? And so to hear the answers to these questions and many more, tune in next week, same time. Praise Yahweh. Be here. I'm telling you, this is great information, and we should always rejoice in the knowledge that comes from Father Yahweh. May Yahweh bless your understanding, and let's go ahead and close in prayer. Praise Yahweh. Most holy and righteous Father Yahweh, this is your servant Yisrayl Hawkins, coming to you in unity with all of your men here, Father, and all of those watching, seeking you, Father. All of us being seeds of your last days anointed witness, our great pastor and overseer, our great teacher, Yisrayl Hawkins, and through and by the authority of our righteous high priest who is watching over your house and inspiring us, Father, and leading and guiding us in these last days, Yahshua our Messiah. We do bless you and thank you, Father Yahweh, for allowing us to be reminded, Father Yahweh, of the great plan, Father, which you have created, Father Yahweh, and allowing us to understand in this time period. We do pray and ask, Father Yahweh, that you will continue to open up our minds, Father, so that we can continue to see in great detail, Father, the work that you have done, Father, to prepare a great family to bring honor and glory to you, Father, and to bring forth life in abundance. We do pray and ask, Father, that you will change our hearts and our minds and allow us to be a part of this great work, and that you, Father Yahweh, will allow us to change the evil that has been put in us through genetics and through the teachings of this world before we come to know you, Father Yahweh. And we do ask and pray for your inspiration daily, Father, that we may turn this heart of evil, Father Yahweh, this heart of flesh, and allow it to reflect the high priest's breastplate, Father Yahweh, to have the stones within our hearts and within our minds, Father Yahweh, and to have this pure character before you. We do love you, Father Yahweh, and pray and ask for your guidance and your protection both now and forever. And we do pray and ask all of these things in and by the authority of our righteous high priest, Yahshua our Messiah. Hallelujah, Yahweh. Praise Yahweh. Yahweh bless you.